Everyone, how's it going? Welcome. My name is Tommy Ashby. I am a Scottish musician and singer-songwriter from the Borders. I'm playing in the Bongo Club later on, but I'm also a PhD in psychoacoustics and spatial audio, and that definitely piqued Olaf's interest, and so he wanted me to tell you a bit about it. So I'm going to talk about where music meets science, so the kind of parallels I've drawn between the two, and possibly how that might help you with your music creation in the future. So I'm going to start off by just giving you a brief history of my kind of scientific discovery. So when I was a kid, I loved maths and physics, and I also loved music, and I was wondering whether they went together. And generally the response was, not sure, one's one side of the brain, it's kind of creative, the other one's all technical, they don't go together that well. And as I started looking into it more, I discovered that just wasn't the case. So maths is everywhere in music, from, in an orchestra, counting out the bars while waiting for your next entry, or time signatures, subdivisions, that's all maths. Also in jazz, 2-5-1's the way we describe chord sequences, modes, scales, all that stuff. One of the main ways we communicate in terms of music is through maths. And as I looked more into things like musical instruments, that's based on vibrations of strings and of air columns in terms of trumpets and stuff, and standing waves and harmonics. All those things can be described scientifically as well as used in a musical sense. So to give you a very brief, quick first example, this is called a Chladni plate, and if you put some sand on top of this vibrating plate and you play certain frequencies, it creates nice patterns, but it's about standing waves. So if you have a quick look. So as he plays different notes, different patterns are formed. It's also true in water. So that's a really cool video showing how science and music can interact and create these creative things. It was actually, if anyone watched the recent Rings of Power, Lord of the Rings spin-off, the intro sequence is based on a Chladni plate, and all those kind of graphics use that. Now, probably the most famous scientist ever was Einstein. He was also an incredible violinist. And so he said, if I had not been a scientist, I would have been a musician. Life without playing music is inconceivable for me. I live my daydreams in music. I see my life in terms of music. I get most joy in life out of music. So there's a scientist who really loved music. Also, Richard Feynman, one of my favorite physicists, was also a great bongo player and was quite famous for doing that. The two Brians, Brian Cox and Brian May, very well-known musicians and scientists. So that initial premise that music and science don't go well together, I just didn't find to be the case. So I decided I want to go to university and combine those two interests. So I went and I studied, well, not exactly this. I went to a course called the Tonmeister course, which is at the University of Surrey, and they wanted someone who studied maths, physics, and music, and that was me. So off I went and found lots of individuals with similar interests. And so all the questions I had from school, like, how does sound propagate? What is sound? How do I hear things at all? How does my brain process sound? How do microphones and loudspeakers work? All those initial questions started to get answered, and we got more in depth. How do I perceive pitch? How do I perceive loudness? It was just in a new world that I hadn't really known that much about in school. Now, how is that of any use to you? Well, technical knowledge can complement your music making. So say you open up a project in Logic or Pro Tools or some kind of DAW, and you're presented with your sample rate and your bit depth and all these technical terms. If you're anything like I was, and occasionally still am with other things, you'll go, well, I'm just going to pick one that someone on YouTube told me to do or my friend told me to do. Whereas if you have some technical knowledge about, say, what sample rate means, it's not always a bigger sample rate is better. Sometimes it makes more sense to use something else. And so basically, if you have some technical knowledge and some understanding of what they actually mean, then you can make more informed choices. Same with, say, a microphone. If you understand how a microphone physically works and the different types of microphones, like a dynamic microphone or a condenser microphone, and you know physically the process involved in that, then it might inform which microphone you choose to record your guitar. So that was really interesting and hopefully is useful. Sometimes having technical knowledge can be slightly overwhelming because you discover all the stuff you don't know. So I think with this, another thing to remember, which is a scientific thought, is just be experimental as well. If you don't know, have a play, see what happens. But having a little bit of technical knowledge is helpful. So I discovered all these things at my undergrad university, and one of the things that really piqued my interest within that was psychoacoustics, which was what my PhD is in. Basically, you can objectively measure sound in various ways. You know, you have these meters and stuff, but they didn't always line up with what a human listener perceives in that situation. There was kind of objective measurements, such as what I'm reading on a meter, but sometimes something could be metering really loudly on a VU meter, but someone can't hear it as loudly themselves, and there are physical things to do with the processing of your brain and a human listener that causes that. And so there's a disconnect, and I want to know more about human listeners' interaction with sound. That is psychoacoustics. My particular interest was in spatial audio, and in particular localization, which is just working out where sound is coming from. To give you a quick example, this little person here is a little listener, and he has two ears on either side of his head, like we all do, and there's a sound source coming from his right now. As the sound source arrives, it hits his right ear before his left ear, and that means your brain has learned all these different time delays, and so can use that to work out the angle of the sound. What this also taught me was that the brain is doing crazy mathematical calculations all the time, and you're unaware of it. You're doing amazing maths without knowing about it, which is very cool. The other thing you can use is, as the sound source is, say, coming from this side, your actual head acts as a baffle, and so this side of your ear is getting a quieter sound. So once again, your brain has learned the interval level difference, that's called, and the other one's called the interval time difference. Basically, it uses them to work out where a sound's coming from. Once you start considering all 3 dimensions, it gets more complicated. That's why your ear is a funny shape, because it's called your pinna, and that does various things that gives your brain more clues as to where sound's coming from. My particular PhD was in how, as you move through a space, how those movements and the changes in all those cues can improve your experience further. Sorry, that's about as techie as I'm going to get. So I hope that all made sense. In terms of actually what I did, I put people in dark rooms, attached lasers to their heads, and fired sounds at them. So it's actually me, but there's someone doing the test. You can see they're responding by firing the lasers at where they perceive the sound to be coming from. They were suspended in this sphere, and there was loads of loudspeakers everywhere. And what I was doing was using different sounds and trying to sort of trick the listeners and using different concepts to work out how their brain was actually processing the sound. So occasionally we could do things like make a sound appear like it was coming from behind them when it was actually directly in front of them. That's a very common one. So I've said all this techie stuff that I was doing in my PhD. How is it useful for you? Well, I think considering the spatial dimension of your recordings is important. People often talk about, oh, have I got the right instruments in this track? Are they all the right levels? Is my vocal louder than the kick drum, etc.? Have I got the right effects? But are you considering the spatial dimension of your music? Even in stereo, where it's positioned in the stereo field is important, and if you make active choices on that. So a quick example is if you listen to someone like Billie Eilish, who's producing music just now, her music lacks reverb, basically, on her vocal, and that makes her vocal feel really present and up in your face. Whereas if you did that with an orchestral recording, you probably wouldn't enjoy it very much. With that, you want sound and room. You'd want a room like this, and you'd want an experience that was enveloping and made you feel like you were there, a very natural sound. So room acoustics and stuff like that in your recordings are important, and give it more of an individual sound. Spatial dimensions can be how wide the sound sounds, where it is positioned in the sound field. This is particularly important now when sometimes now we're being asked to make Dolby Atmos mixes. I don't know if anyone's experienced that yet. And other spatial things, you've got Apple's spatial audio coming along. All those things are adding to this spatial aspect that you can use in your music creation. Personally, I've recently released an album, and I've done an acoustic album where I've started doing binaural recordings. Now, I don't know if you've ever seen binaural heads. They are pretty weird looking, some of them. This is the first one, was a guy called Oscar, who was made by Bell Labs in 1930, and he's got 2 microphones, one on the other side of his head, and this was supposed to create a more submersive experience for the listener. This Keymo one's a bit more modern, but they do look like that. It looks like you're singing at, well, you are singing at a dummy. It's supposed to give a more submersive experience, like you're there. If you listen to really good binaural recordings, it is amazing. You can feel things move around your head. It's a very weird experience. But yeah, that's what I've been interested in recently. You can look into that as well. There's some stuff on YouTube and things like that about binaural recordings. By the end of my PhD, so I've done all this research, I was thinking recently about what I learned generally that could be applied to music making, and I was listening to a podcast by a bird ecologist. I like bird watching, and she was saying that there are 3 main characteristics that she finds in every PhD from whatever subject that you're interested in, and they are staying power, an inquisitive mind, and critical thinking. That was what she said, which I think lots of musicians have as well. And the main thing that I think is important to get a PhD and make an album is staying power. So this beeper thing, I'm pressing the right thing. There we go. So you don't need to be a genius to do a PhD. I don't think. There were some geniuses there. They're very intimidating, but generally being hardworking and organized. I wasn't particularly organized, but if you can be organized, that's great too. And with every door you open during a PhD, another 5 are there waiting for you to bamboozle you further. And you're sitting alone doing this work. Data analysis, it's all hard, but there are these moments of joy when you find something out. The whole point of a PhD is discovering someone that no one else has found before. And so that's a really exciting moment and feels very creative, which is similar to making an album. When you do these, you create these things that you think no one has made before, and you really want to make that creative statement. So the staying power, I've made an album and I've done a PhD, and it's very similar. They're both hard, they're both very joyous, but yeah, that is important. But one of the other things that I learned was to have an experimental mindset. So just find stuff out for the sake of it in terms of recordings. If you want to record something, try it out. Stick a microphone in a bucket. Well, do something safe, but you know, try things out and follow it through. I was reading a book by Stephen King, and it was on writing. He's an amazing writer about his own writing, and he was saying he just comes up with a weird concept, and he doesn't know where it's going to go, and the plot just appears as he writes it. I think I've been doing that with my songwriting. Just come up with an idea, write the song, follow it through, try and finish it, and see where you end up. In terms of spatial audio, as I was chatting about earlier, there's all these new technologies like Dolby Atmos, like Apple's spatial audio stuff, and we have a chance to play with all that stuff now. So you can do individual things. They've created all these new technologies, and as artists, they need people to take them on and try things out. They need you to be the creatives for what they have made in their labs and in their I don't know, dark rooms where they're designing this stuff. When stereo was first made, first kind of started to be used, if you listen to recordings by Jimi Hendrix or the Beatles, you'll see things like Jimi Hendrix will be panning the guitars left and right like crazy, and there'll be drum kits over the right-hand side and a guitar over here. They're really like, it's like they're discovering it, where now maybe we've gotten to a more conventional approach to spatial recordings. And if you look at it as more trying to create a world in which your music inhabits, you could create some amazing experiences for the listener. Just going to rattle through these last few things. So one of the other things I learned was a lot of lessons from the past. My research was based on stuff from the 1940s, a lot of it. And they were amazing minds in terms of music. If you like a particular genre, go back to the very start, find out who was doing it. Then your music will sound authentic and people will really resonate with it, and it will take you away from your contemporaries and make you sound less derivative. So lessons from the past is a good thing. And also, when I was first doing physics and music, I didn't want to talk about my research when talking about my music. I wanted them to be separate because, I don't know, I was worried about being cool or something. Or actually, for PR people, they love anything that makes you different from any other musician. So if you're interested in embroidery or topiary or whatever you're interested in, that is what they want to talk about. That's how I met Olaf, was because he was writing an article about my scientific research along with my musical stuff. And also, if you're writing lyrics, writing about your interests just takes you away from everyone else who might be writing about more generic topics. So it doesn't make you, it doesn't make you not interesting. It makes you, the well-rounded human that you are. Anyway, so to give you a sum up, technical knowledge will not mess with your mojo. Learn as much as you can. Get interested in all these different scientific concepts. There's technology there for you to grapple with and have fun with and experiment with. And to me, I'd say science and music are two sides of the same coin. They come from the same place. Science is inherently a creative endeavor, same as music, and science can be harnessed as an artistic tool to make you more freely able to express what you want to express. So yeah, just play with science and try things out. That's the end of my chat. I'm playing tonight. If anyone wants to come at the Bongo Club, please come down, and thank you for listening. Yeah. Come and say hi as well.